Must be please hold, because here's Michael R., the pride of Easton, Pennsylvania. And Easton, Pennsylvania's answer to George Bailey. Questions for Dave. Hi, Dave. In Church and State, Volume 1, page 507, Weisshaupt reveals to Cerebus that Suenteus Po was his uncle. 1. Is this why Weisshaupt believed that he, quote, was fated to be the Redeemer, unquote? Was Suenteus Po, I'll actually read all of his questions. Was Suenteus Po a, quote, true, unquote, true uncle to Weisshaupt? Or was he an illusion or something else? The easiest part of the tripartite Michael R. question, who were Weishaupt's parents? Mr. and Mrs. Weisshaupt. That's as far as I'm going on that one. I'm not a real big family guy to begin with. So the last thing I would do as a writer is concern myself with, okay, what was Weishaupt's mom and dad like? So, but getting back to the first two questions, you always have to bear in mind whenever we're talking about Suenteus Po and illusionism, there isn't the Suenteus Po. I mean, there is in the sense that there was a Suenteus Po who was deemed to have been the Redeemer, but the closest analogy, and I think I must have said this somewhere else, but probably don't say it as often as I should when talking about Suenteus Po. Suenteus Po is in the Cerebus world context the equivalent of the Spanish Catholic Jesus or Jesus. Yo soy Jesus. I am Jesus. On planet Earth has one connotation among Spanish speakers and another connotation among everybody else on the planet. And that's really the way Suenteus Po is with illusionism. It has one meaning for illusionists, and for everyone else, it has a completely different context. So I would venture to say that Weisshaupt had an uncle named Suenteus Po, or an uncle who called himself Suenteus Po, and it wasn't just, well, that's a name that illusionists tend to use the same way that Spanish Catholics use the name Jesus. That would mean that it was over in the direction of a theological messianic context for Weisshaupt, that his uncle, whose name was Suenteus Po, or who called himself Suenteus Po, was interested in all of the things that would move him from the category of just Suenteus Po happens to be his name to the pretension that he is the Suenteus Po, or he is one of the candidates for the Suenteus Po. So that's as clear as I can be on that one.
So
all the best. Go ahead.
The accordion knot cutting was the aardvark Po his uncle or not? I'm going to assume not.
You're quite welcome to assume that. It's one of those, I wouldn't, as the creator knowing the critical necessity of Suenteus Po being ambiguous conceptually, I would not come down on either side of that question and say, as the writer of Cerebus, yes, the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po was Weishaupt's uncle. It can definitely be inferred that way, but it could definitely be inferred another way, particularly in the sense that whatever Weishaupt thought or whatever Weishaupt experienced, he might have thought that the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po was more important than his Suenteus Po uncle, or was less important in exactly that messianic sort of expectation thing. His viewpoint would be suspect just because Suenteus Po was his uncle. Of course, he's going to think that his uncle is more important in the Suenteus Po pecking order than the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po. If his uncle wasn't the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po, if his uncle was the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po, then presumably he would be manifestly on that page that yes, the Aardvarkian Suenteus Po is important because he's my uncle, and he's my uncle because he's important.
I mean, these are the kind of questions I love. Of it's a yes no question. Well, no, it's you never thought about it. It didn't come up. It wasn't important to the 300 issue saga. It's not the kind of thing where you were mulling in your head down at Peter's place of, well, was he or wasn't he? I don't know. It didn't matter. Move on. I got pages to draw.
No, that's partly what I'm saying, but yeah. It's not partly what I'm saying. That I did think about it. I mean, this is one of those things about a 6,000-page graphic novel where the crux of the graphic novel is the whole Cerebus Suenteus Po thing. I did contemplate as many different possibilities of what that was or what that could have been, and then set limits on myself. It's like I would be tipping the whole 6,000-page graphic novel into another category if I definitively answered that question. I mean, virtually any question that you could ask me about Cerebus or Suenteus Po or Siren that has to do with who they were definitively, I definitely backed off of that, because otherwise I wouldn't have been doing an accurate portrayal of or an accurate enactment of what it is that I was trying to enact in two-dimensional space. And I don't want to tip the 6,000 page graphic novel into any category. It's fine as it is. It's important that it has the ambiguity that it has where it has the ambiguity. The fact that Weisshaupt was the president and I'm the president of Aardvark Anaheim, Weishaupt's uncle becomes a far more important story element than just, well, was he or wasn't he? It's like, that really hinges on personal interpretations of things. this is straying dangerously over to Bill Clinton's. It depends on what you say the word is.
Well, that Weisshaupt being a not George Washington, but George Washington, I start to think about when he was a kid, did he chop down a cherry tree? And then I'm thinking, no, it's probably a case of when he was in his 20s, he hired somebody to chop down a cherry tree and said, okay, now get this guy over here to be my dad so I can deny that I did it.
There you go. That's perfect.
I mean,
that's perfect.
Because he's not Washington, but yeah, he's kind of Washington.
Well, he's from where we're sitting, we go, he's Washington. Because that one of the reasons that I adopted that was because there was I wouldn't call it a conspiracy theory at the time, or certainly before I was starting to do Cerebus, where George Washington wasn't George Washington. There was a George Washington, but the guy who actually became the President of the United States was Adam Weishaupt, substituting for George Washington. And I went, okay, that's interesting. Why 200 years later are we going, no, this is what actually happened. The whole Illuminati thing was interesting to me. And interesting, but crazy. It's like you don't want to get too far away from the fact that no, George Washington was the father of the United States, the first president, and a great war hero. Can we just leave that alone? It's like if you want to come up with there's interesting theories as to why George Washington wasn't actually George Washington and Adam Weishaupt became George Washington. It's I certainly had a sense at the time in the 1970s that this is, in Howard Chaykin's phrase, only going to get later and more so. So if I'm able to do this 6,000-page graphic novel, it's going to have a lot of this in it, because I don't think we're coming into a time period where we're going to go, no, you people you did too much of the brown acid, and you sat around and talked about this stuff and talked yourselves into all of this crazy stuff. But we're not there anymore. It's now the 21st century. We're all living on the moon and wearing rocket shoes, and we don't go for that stuff anymore. It's like, no. We're going to get to the point where you can't tell reality from fantasy, because there's going to be at least a dichotomous view of just about everything. And boy, are we getting to that point in spades.
My favorite is, I read an article where it was just insane uses of government money, and it was a grad student who was on student loans, getting a grant to write their grad paper, and the paper was William Shakespeare secretly two Aborigine women? And the problem with the theory is that Australia hadn't have been discovered yet, so they didn't know about Aborigine women. Well,
that could be a conspiracy theory too.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Well, no, so like this grad student, this is the paper they were writing, and somebody pointed that out, and the grad student was, highly offended. Well, how can you say it's not possible? Because it's physically impossible. There's no way two Aborigine women were in England in that time period writing plays.
Because they didn't exist yet.
Well, they existed, just not there.
Right. See, but we're coming into a time period where it's like that's only going to slow people down a little bit before they go, well, that's just colonialist white thinking. That you're saying that Aborigine women couldn't have gone to England because there hadn't any contact with Australia, it's like, well, there wasn't the white man's history contact with Australia, but they could have arrived there, and being, of this super intelligent race, they were capable of writing Shakespeare, and particularly with the whole politically correct way of thinking on campuses. I would be inclined to write a paper like that. It's what makes white people look like lying, stupid people, and makes people of color look super intelligent and oppressed and victimized. And it's like they've already had too many instances of people writing satirical papers that I bet this will get published. This will get published because it falls along that basic strata of meaning. It's like that's part of what I was picking up on in the 1970s. That it wasn't just the Illuminatus trilogy and things like that. That was the cutting edge of it. Philip K. Dick and all of those guys. It's like, no, this is a seriously opened can of worms where we're going to arrive at the point where we go, is this planet Earth as we understand it and as we have historically perceived it, or is this a can of worms? And if it is not the world that we perceive, but it's actually a can of worms, are we agreed that the can of worms is preferable to the world that we've perceived up until now? And it's like, this would be a good reason to get locked up in the 1960s or 70s in an insane asylum, which we don't have anymore, and is now becoming a slam dunk in the other direction. Anything that isn't the world that we perceived up until now is infinitely preferable to the world that we used to perceive. Things can only get better from here. Okay, moving on to John